Skyler Roberts.
Good morning. I would like to begin by thanking Creative Mornings for having me and you all for attending and for the beautiful performance we just saw from Rafi Blue. What a sweetheart. My name is Skyler Roberts, and I'm an historian absolutely captivated by attire, in particular the ways that fashion reflects the cultural mores, societal norms, and artistic and historic influences of the age in which it was created. Today's theme is parallel, a topic which can be richly illustrated by the stylistic echoes of trends and silhouettes disappearing and reappearing throughout different eras and epochs. These echoes are unsurprising when we consider that some of the earliest evidence of humans making and wearing clothing, bone tools and bones from skinned animals, were discovered in a cave in Morocco and date back at least 120,000 years. Much later, mass production of clothing arrived with the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century. Mechanized production and the birth of ready-to-wear market quickly shifted fashion's focus from luxury for the elite to clothing designed for us, the masses. This system is an industry built upon the concept of change. Fashion is cyclical by nature. The industry's ability to constantly reinvent itself keeps the chain of production moving. The manufactured desire for change in the form of trends leads us to replace still useful items with new pieces more in line with current modes. As Shakespeare quipped in Much Ado About Nothing, fashion wears out more apparel than the man. This has never been more apparent than today, as fast fashion and the technology that enables it foments a disposable culture fueled by waste and environmental degradation. But first, however, let us time travel to the early 20th century when women radically amended the way they had been dressing for centuries. For nearly 400 years, the corset and the silhouette that it produced remained the focal point of women's fashion. For those unfamiliar, corsets are stiffened support garments that provide compression to shape the figure, usually through lacing. There's a beautiful one. The style of dress was restrictively tight and severely limited the wearer's mobility. This is a perfect example. In the early 1900s, women's clothing underwent a dramatic metamorphosis. The new century ushered in an appetite for experimentation and a taste for change that extended across the artistic spectrum. Forward-thinking designers introduced the modern concepts of comfort and practical design to fashion. One of the forerunners of this modern style, and one of my favorites, was designer Paul Poiret. Known for waging war upon the corset, Poiret stated in his autobiography that like all great revolutions, that one had been made in the name of liberty, to give free play to the abdomen. In 1907, Poiret presented a collection of corset-free dresses with raised waistlines that delighted the avant-garde and scandalized traditionalists. Though shocking when released, these designs borrowed heavily from history. The simplistic styles were influenced greatly by the Japanese kimono and the Greek chiton. Another forward-thinking Edwardian designer inspired by the past was Jean Paquin. She created gowns with narrowed skirts and waistlines just below the bust, which she described as the new directoire style. So named for their likeness to looks from the Directoire and Napoleonic Empire eras following the French Revolution. The shoulder became the support point of these garments instead of the waist, a new again principle that caused fashion to evolve back towards classical antiquity. These shifts in silhouette reflected a larger societal shift in the roles of women. A modern, more comfortable take on fashion was required for the modern women who went to work in the millions during World War I. While men were at the front, they worked in factories, military plants, and construction. They were conductors, bus drivers, and managers. Opulent and delicate clothing made of lace and embroidery took a back seat to more practical styles as the entire textile industry shifted their work to the needs of war. These women emerged from the war determined to establish their independence. I find it fascinating parallel that the empire waist was again made popular in the 1960s, which of course is another era characterized by revolution and the changing roles of women. The 1920s, or Jazz Age, is oft remembered as a glamorous era of excess, exemplified by the flapper with her cropped hair and tasseled dresses. The 1920s is now synonymous with glitz. And there's my girl Joan Crawford looking very glitzy. But beneath the glitter was a further push towards simplicity and style. Menswear moved away from formal three-piece suits and starched collars for daytime. Wide-leg trousers, known as Oxford bags, named after the comfy trousers that rowers and Oxford crew teams used, were made in cozy flannel fabrics and came in a variety of colors. The invention of the assembly line and labor-saving devices such as vacuum cleaners, my favorite, which I saw in the Vacuum Museum in Portland, Oregon, was called Vacuna, Goddess of Leisure, which is quite the selling point for me. Washing machines were also invented, and these granted men and women more leisure time than ever before. The new pared-down fashions were perfectly suited to the activities society was filling their newly found free time with. Sunbathing was a favored pastime, and suntans became fashionable for the first time in the 1920s. Racy swimsuits and tight-fitting wools and knits became all the rage, scandalizing more conservative beachgoers. Hard to believe that that was found scandalous, but it certainly was. It's difficult to imagine today that these form-fitting suits were so controversial. As summarized by the Maryland Center for History and Culture, heads of beaches, private resorts, and country clubs instituted regulations on women's swimwear, instituting fines or possible imprisonment for swimsuits that were too many inches above your knee, or in some cases, if you were not wearing stockings. Some public venues even employed censors to walk and monitor sunbathers and enforce women's dress codes when needed. Another shocking style in women's wear of this era was the popular masculine or androgynous aesthetic, which paired perfectly with the equally disquieting bobbed hairstyles. My own great-grandmother, Ida Mae Moore, recalled how furious our entire family was when she boldly cut off her hair in the 1930s. Coco Chanel's coveted 1920 suits borrowed elements of men's fashion, such as tweed fabric and the concept of pockets. Some bold ladies were even so brazen as to wear pants in public. Today, pants are a staple of most people's wardrobes, but in the 1920s, a lady wearing them out was doing an act of defiance and even bravery. Film stars such as my beloved Marlene Dietrich in the 30s and Katharine Hepburn in the 1940s further popularized pants, but they were not even deemed socially acceptable widely for women until the 1960s. As I learned while reading Eleanor Medhurst's wonderful book, which I highly recommend, Unsuitable, A History of Lesbian Fashion, in part we can thank couple Madge Garland and Dorothy Todd for popularizing this boyish aesthetic. And that's them. Todd was the editor of British Vogue, and Garland was its fashion editor from 1922 to 1926. As Rosalind Jana wrote in a piece on the Vogue website, Todd's vision for Vogue, aided by Garland, who also brought in contributors, including photographer Cecil Beaton, was thoroughly modern, unapologetically intelligent, and implicitly queer in both tone and appearance. Their bold influence can be recognized as what Medhurst describes as precursors to things that have grown in the fashion landscape in the decades since. Though not entirely naturally, history is never a steady progression, such as gender and ambiguity, women in trousers or shorter length skirts, and fashion as an artistic expression. This effect was in full swing in the 70s and 80s as androgynous fashion surged in popular culture, made desirable by rock and roll icons like my beloved David Bowie and the ever badass Grace Jones. Ooh. These sartorial choices were not merely stylistic decisions, but powerful visual statements against societal expectations and norms. There has long been a strong parallel between the art world and the fashion industry. This is perhaps most sublimely illustrated by the surreal and revolutionary fashions of my all-time favorite designer, Elsa Schiaparelli. Born to an aristocratic family, Schiaparelli removed herself from a life of luxury as she was convinced it had precluded her from a life of creativity and art. During a transatlantic crossing to America, she befriended Gabrielle Picabia, wife of the Dadaist painter Francis Picabia. Her interest in the Dada and Surrealist movements and her friendship with the Picabias facilitated her entry into the artistic circles of New York, where she met artists like Man Ray and Marcel Duchamp. In the 1920s, she returned to Paris, where she assisted Man Ray and his Dada magazine, the Société Anonyme, and met self-proclaimed king of fashion, Paul Poiret, who encouraged her to open her own fashion house. She was one of the first designers to use a visible zipper in haute couture, and also one of the first to develop the wrap dress, famously perfected by designer Diane von Furstenberg in the 70s. In 1934, she added a millinery department to her business. One of the iconic designs at this time was the madcap, worn by celebrities like Katharine Hepburn. This hat was so widely copied by her contemporaries that Schiaparelli ordered her staff to destroy her own remaining stock of madcaps because she was tired of looking at it. Her designs were so beloved worldwide that in 1934 she became the first female fashion designer to be honored on the cover of Time magazine. Soon after, she began an active collaboration with Spanish surrealist painter Salvador Dalí. In 1937, they created their famous shoe hat. Their collaboration also birthed another iconic piece called the Tears dress, a reference to some of Dalí's previous work, including this painting, 3 young surrealist women holding in their arms skins of an orchestra from 1936. In the painting, Dalí depicts women with torn flesh, and this exact image is replicated onto the fabric. Tear dress is from the Circus collection of 1938. This collection is very close to my heart, and these are my absolute ultimate dream clothes. Skeleton dress is also from this collection and also references Dalí's work. This incredible piece explores the skeletal form utilizing a special quilting technique called trampunto. It was created in part to serve as a symbol of the suffering of the ongoing Second World War. Many critics interpret these designs as a creative response also to the Spanish Civil War and to the spread of fascism. 1937 also saw a Schiaparelli collaboration with French avant-garde poet and artist Jean Cocteau. My favorite piece is an evening coat festooned with roses that I was very lucky enough to see in person at the Dalí Museum in St. Petersburg. She described these collaborations as offering a sense of exhilaration beyond the crude and boring reality of merely making a dress to sell. Fashion was somewhat stalled as the outbreak of World War II led to a shortage of materials and rationing. Those who served were often in uniform, and practical utility clothing with similar design elements was created for other citizens. British utility dress could be bought with ration coupons. As James Laver writes in Costume and Fashion, A Concise History, the look was simple but stylish, with good proportion and line. It incorporated padded shoulders, a nipped-in waist, and hems to just below the knee. And my dress today is from the 40s and a good example of this. Civilians also showed creativity as pillowcases, blankets, and men's old shirts were transformed into women's blouses and suits and children's clothing. Some brides repurposed curtains to create their wedding dresses. Elements of military style became popular in civilian dress. A great example is the leather bomber jacket, which has remained stylish in almost every decade since. One of my fashion obsessions of this era are elegant women's handbags designed in Britons, which featured separate pockets to hold your gas mask. At this time, various accessories which reflected light or glowed in the dark were also created to help the wearers find their way through blackouts. One of the results of rationing was the invention of the bikini in 1946 by Jacques Heim, who called it atome to suggest that the swimsuit was as small as an atom. Louis Reard created the bikini around the same time and claimed to be inspired by an atoll in the Marshall Islands that the US had chosen to target its atomic bombs. And indeed, these abbreviated designs had an explosive effect on fashion and society in the 1940s. At the end of the war, Christian Dior introduced his iconic New Look in 1947. This groundbreaking design featured a once-again cinched-in waist and voluminous full skirts that used abundant yards of fabric to create elegant, lavish silhouettes. These extravagant designs were created to celebrate life after war, a life of increasing prosperity for many, and a time when women returned to the home sphere in droves, as men came home from war and returned to their jobs and their roles as head of their houses. Post-war society became far more conservative and placed an emphasis on tradition and the concept of normality. This return to classic values was reflected in fashion, as the gains in comfort and practicality made in the early half of the century were eschewed for this wasp waist ideal popularized by designers such as Dior. This trend for figure-hugging styles and hourglass figures revived the market for corsetry. The exaggerated silhouettes were created by underwear. Waspies, girdles, and cathedral bras with shaping underwires were all the rage. Much later, of course, Madonna famously subverted this look into a statement of absolute female power during her 1990 Blonde Ambition tour when she wore this incredibly sensational conical bra designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier. Men's clothing also benefited from the loosening of fabric restrictions. Trousers became fuller, and double-breasted suits with broad shoulders and boxy cuts were seen everywhere. The post-war economic boom saw the rise of new synthetic materials, such as polyester and modern takes on rayon. Triacetate, spandex, and acrylic made their way into the fashion world. Nylon became widely used for underwear, nightgowns, even classic men's white shirts. Nylon stockings were considered so innovative and durable that they quickly displaced silk stockings in the market. The 1960s were an innovative period of exploration and one of my very favorite eras, as designers experimented with new technologies and fabrics. While science ventured into space with a series of missions culminating in 1969 with the Apollo 11 moon landing, fashion ventured into its own space age, led by brilliant designers like Pierre Cardin, André Courrèges, Paco Rabanne, and Rudi Gernrich. These designs featured sleek unisex silhouettes in new plastic materials and bold colors, and were accessorized with vinyl boots, plastic goggles, and helmets. Though these predictions for the future of fashion are, in my opinion, sadly not utilized today, their creations influenced fashion for decades. Paco Rabanne, born in the Basque region of northern Spain, was an integral designer during the youthquake movement of the 60s, and one of the originators of this space-age aesthetic. He utilized plastic, aluminum, and chainmail to create his glamorous 1966 collection, which I think is delightfully titled 12 Unwearable Dresses in Contemporary Materials. And it was this innovative use of unlikely materials which separated him from all the rest. Rabanne was also admired for his incredible costume design, most famously this amazing green disc mini dress worn by the fabulous Jane Fonda in, of course, the 1968 film Barbarella. 1963 saw the release of French designer Pierre Cardin's Cosmocore collection, which introduced entirely new and streamlined shapes, and in some cases adopted the same cuts, colors, and fabrics for both the men's and women's looks. There's his design for Cosmocore. These signature ensembles featured full knit bodysuits with layered skirts, vests, and bibs. In addition to introducing and expertly utilizing new materials, these bold designers paved the way to later decades, embracing unisex fashion by creating modern designs free of historic gender associations. While the 1960s looked ahead, fashion of the 1970s was steeped in serious nostalgia for the 1930s and 1940s. Structured shoulders and shirtwaist dress were back in vogue. This was partly in reference to past wartime eras, as well as homage to the hugely popular film The Godfather, which was released in 1972. Yves Saint Laurent was especially inspired by 1940s style, and his 1971 collection, Liberation, caused a stir as some fashion reporters and consumers reacted with revulsion to these styles, so reminiscent of those popular during the German occupation. They felt that the look was 1940s wartime prostitute, and they felt it was shocking. Fashion of this era was also heavily influenced by social movements, with certain clothing giving visual currency to activists and their causes. The miniskirt, invented by Mary Quant, reflected a desire for change, and in the 1960s, women protested to destigmatize the miniskirt. And there she is, designing one on a model. These daring mid-thigh length skirts expressed liberation, independence, and sexual freedom for many women. Formed around 1966, the Black Panther Party was founded to fight against racial discrimination. Their look, which subverted traditional military attire, consisted of black leather jackets, black pants, dark sunglasses, and the iconic black beret. This look sent a powerful message about Black pride and liberation, and helped to manifest the ethos that Black is beautiful. By the 1970s, almost 2/3 of this party was made up of women. These revolutionaries helped to redefine beauty standards for Black women, who had generally long conformed to white beauty standards, in particular by leaving hair natural and an afro to express cultural solidarity. Hippie culture at this time also promoted more natural beauty standards, and bell-bottom pants, paisley prints, and the mourning black armband became symbols of this nonviolent ideology. On the street today, you might find it difficult to place exactly which decade we are currently in, as every era, every trend, and every reference is now simultaneously happening at once. The advent of social media and influencer marketing has introduced myriad microtrends to the fashion landscape, such as cottagecore, coquette, or the clean girl aesthetic. These are rapid speed trends, and they are intertwined with and made possible by the fast fashion industry. For the sake of quantity, quality and artistic integrity is being sacrificed. Overproduced goods made of cheap fossil fuel-based synthetic fibers lead to massive amounts of waste. Over 101 tons of textile waste is produced annually. Most of this waste ends up in our landfills, where its decomposition further pollutes our environment. This cycle is reflective of our information age, and to me speaks to the nihilism inherent in a culture that celebrates capitalism above all else. I hope that I have made it apparent today that in part our very identities are shaped through our associations with our clothing. What we wear can be a powerful force of personal and outward expression, as each garment we wear is ingrained with cultural and societal codes and secret historic references. To be fashionable is to actively participate in the industry of trend, but to have style is to possess something deeply, deeply personal. As Iris Apfel, a New York legend of design and fashion who passed away last year, said, "Being stylish and being fashionable are two entirely different things. You can easily buy your way into being fashionable, but style, I think, is in your DNA." Our clothes represent us to the outside world before we even have the chance to speak, but we can always choose what they say. Thank you.
I don't know about y'all, but that was a whole journey we went on, right?
Oh, yes.
Like, oh my goodness, that could have been in Journey in January, but it makes me think so much differently about the clothes I look in my closet now. So just out of curiosity, how many people got dressed for today because you knew we'd be hearing from a style icon here in Ybor? I will shamelessly say yes, I got dressed for Skyler today. Yes, so does anyone have questions? We do have some time, which is wonderful because I love to leave time for questions. Does anyone have a burning question? Oh,
Burning question.
Hi.
Hi.
That was fabulous. Thank you.
you.
Okay, here's my question. The 80s seemed like they deviated so much from everything else. And I was in college at that time and just dug it. So I'm wondering what your take is on 80s fashion wear.
So sadly, 20 minutes was not enough for me to web the spider webs of all fashion history together, and I did leave a lot out. I think the 80s was hugely important for fashion, particularly women's fashion, because so many women went back to work as well in that era. And so it's a time of really portraying the 40s again with big shoulder pads, another echo of a time when women also went back to work. And you see the beginning of, to me, the 70s and 80s is a time where there is no longer a dominant style. There is so many pockets of personal style. There is punk rock style, there is disco style, and I think the 80s is very special for that reason because it becomes a branch of all these personal ways of dressing. I will say though, as a person that buys vintage clothing for a living, it is also the time when things begin to be made more poorly, unfortunately. You can really start to see, of course not in couture clothes, those will always be made with care and the best fabrics, but you really start to see a downgrade in material and things like that. So it's very interesting for that, but a lot of times it's hard to collect them because every year things are made in less and less strong materials. That was a good question, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you. Yeah, Britt.
I was wondering, you procure vintage clothes, but I was curious as to your process. How do you go about finding these beautiful pieces and things for the shops that you
So it's just for Fabulous La France, and then for myself. So for myself, it is a constant hunt all the time. You go to the thrift store, you hit every yard sale you see, you drive by slow and you're like, nah, it looks boring, and then you're like, no. You see a little splash of something and you have to get out of your car or off your bicycle and you have to investigate. With the store, we are lucky enough that Jill Wax has had this beautiful shop in Ybor City, which is right down the street, and you should go in. We open at noon for 50 years. And so we are rather spoiled at this point. People call us and they say, hey, I've collected this my whole life, or unfortunately, often a loved one has passed away and they had a beautiful collection. And then we kind of do the work to see if it fits in the rubric of what we purchase, which is 70s, 60s, and earlier vintage fashion. They come on down, we look through everything, and we discuss prices, and we figure out. And determining age is a big part of that, and that is honestly just constantly doing your homework. Like, there is never a time when I am not watching an old film or reading a book because I love fashion and I'm intrigued by it, and I want to know. And I could spend the rest of my life and not know an nth of the information that's out there.
Fascinating. Go for it, Corinne.
Follow up. If they are damaged in some way, how do you go about fixing some of these like pieces? How does that happen?
So I will say a big part of wearing vintage clothing, which I am a huge proponent of, as I said in the piece, say no to fast fashion, hit your thrift store, go to your vintage store. But the labor of love for older clothing is that you have to mend them. All older clothing has been worn, and even if it has not, it has withstanded 50 to 100 years. So for the store, if something is worth it, it's maybe a $50 or more price point, or there's not other issues with it, we will spend the time to try to mend it, to take care of it. Jill is a master of stain removing, and I'm always asking her, she's my guru of how to get some old champagne out of a wedding dress, things like that. There we go. Crack side and a Q-tip. So it can be a lot of work, but it's so worth it. And often I think, I've gone through millions of pairs of modern heels, and they fall apart after a while. Some of my favorite shoes are from the 30s and 40s, and they're incredibly well constructed, and I will probably have them for another 30 or 40 years. So even though these things need to be mended and they need to be tended to, they are so much stronger and better quality than the clothing we are used to now, unfortunately.
Okay, and I must know too.
Yes.
What is your style today? Can you walk us through
Yes.
your
Today I am
outfit
wearing
today?
a 1940s crepe and silk velvet dress that I purchased at La France. It has the nipped-in waist and the little puff sleeves. And then this is one of my very favorite hats. I have over 200 hats. I'm a bit obsessed with them. My very favorites are 1940s hats, like this one. Has a velvet crown and a straw brim, which is very, very delicate. Doesn't get to be worn very often. This one came from an incredible store in Savannah called The Future. If you're ever there, what a wonderful store. They have a great eye. And I dress in different eras all the time, but I certainly have my favorites. I would say the 40s is one of my favorites. The 1960s is such a weird, beautiful time in cultural history, and I'm just obsessed with it. And then my other favorite would be Edwardian clothing. Unfortunately, with Edwardian clothing, at this point, you're 110 years old, and as I said earlier, it's also a time of corsets. So a lot of times when you find older Edwardian clothing, they are like 18-inch waists, which is pretty wild. You'll think, is this for a child? But no, it was for a full-grown woman. So those are a little harder to source and find in normal modern human sizes, but it's also another beautiful era. And now that I say it, I think those are all the eras of women really getting out in the workforce and really showing that they too are people. Any other questions?
And you also had these beautiful pieces of jewelry in your hair.
Oh, I
as
do.
well.
Poor, my friend over here who hooked me up to this mic had a lot of things to mess with. But I do have, it is not vintage, but it is a beautiful hairpiece by a designer named Colleen Toland, which we do sell at the store, though she recently retired and we're not going to get any more of her goodies. But she studied with a 1930s incredible American jewelry designer named Miriam Haskell, and she's truly a legacy of like American craftsmanship. So if I were you, I would go to the store and buy the remaining few pieces we have left because they're really, really exceptional.
And is there a final question from anyone? I've had tons of burning questions myself, so. All right. Well, then, thank you so much,
Oh,
Skylar,
yes.
for
Oh,
joining
and
us today.
One
Anything
last
else?
thing. I just want to say happy Pride, y'all.
Ah, yes.